Hello everyone, welcome to the last assignment, the last guideline solution. For this time we're working in assignment 11. Okay, so just like last time we're going to be working with some functions, but the cool thing is we're going to be adding some more logical levels, some more interesting statements, like the if statements, so if and if, etc. We'll see what those all mean. So just dive right into exercise 1, GPA classification. In some colleges, the GPA, or grade point average, is used to evaluate the students. So the value of the GPA may range between 0 and 4, depending, and you'll get a certain degree depending on these. So high distinction if your GPA is more than 3.8, distinction if it's between something, and so on. So they're asking in part 1, so main issue that there was in this lab, you or maybe sometimes you look at the Excel, you try out a way to solve something. You don't really, just pay attention to the instructions. So in step 1, they're saying write a function GPA distinction that takes an argument, the numerical GPA, a number between 0 and 4, and returns the corresponding distinction. Is it high? Is it just regular and honors, etc. So really all they're saying, so first of all, we have to make sure we have the developer tab open. So just a reminder, you go to File, Options, and then Customize Ribbon. You can turn it on or off here. So in case the box is unchecked, make sure you check it and press OK. So in the developer, we'll press Visual Basic. This pops up. Right-click, Insert, New Model, just like last time. So we'll start with the function. They want it to be called, I already forgot. Okay, GPA distinction. So GPA underscore distinction. Very important, like the functions, they can only have, they have to be a single word. So like GPA underscore, it's all connected with each other. So you can't say GPA space distinction, this wouldn't work. It has to be a single entity. So GPA underscore distinction, and they did say we want to take in a GPA as an argument. So GPA will just say it's a single. So GPA as single, a reminder, is just saying that, oh, GPA is a variable and it's going to be some sort of number. Okay, so now just using this, we wanted to determine your level of honors, and as mentioned, it's like the conditions are right here. We just have to check them, and we need to use an if statement, right? Because there's a condition. You're going to be checking for a condition. If it's true, you'll do something. So in this first scenario, if my GPA is more than 3.8, I'll say high distinction. So something like this. And a reminder that the name of the function is where you're going to be putting the answer at. So if at some point I get that, oh, I have an honors, I should say GPA distinction equals honors, and honors is a text, so I have to write it between quotations. I can't put it like this. That wouldn't work, because then honors would be a variable that I never defined, I never put a value for it, it's not in my arguments, that will mess it up. So all I'm saying, if at some point I know that the answer is honors, I'd say GPA distinction equals honors. Now, before I could reach that, I have to actually check first. So if GPA is more than 3.8, so greater than or equal 3.8, then we have to do something. So I'll just say GPA distinction is high distinction. So we checked if our GPA is more than 3 or equal to 3.8. It is. We'll just say high distinction. Now, if this was the only thing we were checking for, I can then say and if. I'd stop, and that's it. However, this function is only checking if my GPA is more than 3.8. If it is, I'm getting a high distinction. So let's go and check this one out. So GPA distinction. Now we're not supposed. Now in order to use this, we're gonna need we're gonna need to solve part 2 first. I'll just put here a random number. I'll say this is 3.8, and say here this is 3.6. We're gonna actually have to solve this in a second, but I just want to test out my function yet. So GPA distinction, we'll see it appears because we created it. I'll give it J4 or J5. It says high distinction. Why? I gave it J5, which is 3.8. It went into my code. And 3.8 got put here. Is 3.8 greater than or equal to 3.8? Yes, it is. So I get high distinction. as my output. I'll write here, say 4, and I'll write here 3 point, something that's less than 3.8. If I drag it, it's still going to say high distinction here because 4 is more than 3.8. If I drag it, it doesn't say anything. Like, this is just some output, like a blank or a 0, that something, and this isn't what I put. I didn't put anything for the other values, so I have to keep going. I have to now put the other conditions. But how am I going to put them? Am I going to put them in another if? So I'll say something here like, oh, if GPA, so the next thing, right here. So say I already checked if it's bigger than 3.8. Now all that I need to do is check the other condition. Now, 2 ways I could check the other condition. I could then check if it's between these 2 values. So I could write this as a separate if. I could say, oh, if my GPA is more than, what was the first value? 3.5. And, so and is a keyword when you have multiple conditions. If my GPA is less than or equal 3.79, very important that you rewrite the GPA. I can't remove it and say this, oh, it's more than 3.5 and less than this. That doesn't work. And I can't use the between keyword, like if my GPA is between these 2. I don't think we have that here. Okay, so if my GPA is more than this and less than this, then I can say then GPA distinction should be just distinction. And this would work. Let's see if it works actually. End if. So the end if, by the way, it just like ends your if statement. So you're starting it here. If your condition is true, you're going to be doing these statements. And then you'll stop here. Okay. So let's drag and drop this. For 3.5, we're getting distinction. Why? 3.5 is indeed between 3.5 and 3.79, so we got distinction. And we can keep going like this with the rest of the values. However, I would like to join them in a better way. Not a better way, but like in a different way. How about I use else if? So instead of doing end if for each one, I want to use only one end if at the very end. And then I'd say here, instead of if, I'd say else if. So this should be a single word. Oops. Okay. So what's the difference right now with what I had before and this current solution? In the answer, there's not going to be a difference. It still works. So I just drag and drop it and it still works. However, the way that we had it before, if I didn't have the else if, oh, first, let's explain this for a second. You'll check if you're more than 3.8. If that's true, you'll say high distinction and you'll stop. You won't continue checking. However, the way that we had it before, when I had my end if here, what would have happened? Say your GPA is more than 3.8. Okay, you check it, you put your answer, then you keep going. Then you check this again, because this is another if statement. So this is on its own, and this is on its own. Here you're checking you're more than 3.8, and here you're gonna check again. But what I'm trying to say is, if you know that you're already more than 3.8, there's no need to check this anymore. You can just skip it, and we do that by using the else if. So if we read this as English, I'm checking. If I'm bigger than this, I do my action, and I stop. Else if I wasn't more than 3.8, I'll check something else and I keep going. So now this whole thing is just one big entity together rather than having 2 different if statements. Okay, and even more, I don't need this part. I don't need this part that checks if I'm less than 3.79. What do you think? Knowing that I'll only reach this if statement if the first one was wrong, because this is else if. Else if will only check this condition if the first one was wrong. Well, if the first one was wrong, I'm not bigger than 3.8. Obviously, I have to be less than that, so I'm less than or equal to 3.79, or like 9999. So I could actually remove this, and it'll still work. No need to check for if I'm less than 3.8, because obviously I will be if I ever reach this point. Let's check again. Okay, so far so good. Now I'll just fill the rest of my if statements. So if I'm honors, I have to be between 3.9 and 3.49. But again, using the same logic, if I type in else if GPA is more than 3.2, was it? Why am I forgetting so much today? So 3.2. Usually, if it was on its own, I'd have to check again, and my GPA is less than 3.49. But using the same logic, if this was wrong, if I'm not bigger than 3.5, obviously I'm less, so I'm less than 3.49. I don't need to check for this. So if I'm more than 3.2, I'll just say I have honors. Okay. Then finally, we need to check for the last condition, which is if I'm less than, or if I'm anything otherwise. So I'm basically less than 3.2, I'll just say no distinction. And for the last one, you don't need to say else if, you'll just say else, and you'll write here no distinction. Because there's nothing else to check. Obviously, at this point, I'll just say no distinction. Okay, let's run this. We'll go through it one more time to really get it, but we first might need to solve part 2. So if you notice that I actually wrote some random numbers while I was testing it out. So you'd actually have to solve part 2 before you can actually solve the GPA distinction. So part 2, open sheet GPA, insert in cell J5 the needed formula to calculate the GPA of the first student, and they tell you that GPA is the average grade per credit. So for student 1, the average for Matthew, which is 2.83, it got calculated how? 76 got multiplied by 3. Then 56 by 3, etc. Almost everything is by 3 except maybe the last course was multiplied by 1. Everything got divided by 16, everything then got divided by 25. Now, why this multiplication and division? Well, first of all, the multiplication, when you want to calculate the average of your semester courses, each grade gets multiplied by the credit. So depending on the weight of the grade, almost everything is 3 credit, except for the last one, it's 1 credit. So that's the first thing. Then you have to divide by the number of credits, which happens to be probably 16. So the sum of the credits is 16. That's why we divide by 16. But then why do we divide by 25? Well, if we don't, you'll get your average over 100 because your grades are over 100. So you'll get the average of 100. If you want your GPA to be in between 0 and 4, you'd have to divide by 25 again. So dividing by 25 gets you 100 over 4. It gets 100 over 25, it gets you your GPA is over 4. So let's do that. Now you could grab this, multiply it by this, add, then this, multiply it by this. You could keep doing that for each one of them, and then you're going to have to put the dollar signs in the appropriate places. Or why not use something called sum product, which is really useful. With sum product, we give this range, comma, the other range, and respectively they'll get multiplied. So 3 will be with 76. Respectively, depending on the positions, they'll be multiplied together. So 3 by 76, 3 by 56, and so on. And then each value will be summed together. And I get here something really big because I never divided. So after doing the sum product, I have to divide by 16, then by 25. I get 2.83. Again, if I don't be divided by 25, I just get my average over 100. 16 is for the courses, then 25 is to get the GPA over 100. Now, if I autofill, it's not going to work. Why? Notice how the blue bar is moving with me. Okay, so we have to fix using the dollar signs. Remember that part. So for the blue parts, so for the credits, we'll just put dollar signs everywhere. It'll be fixed. 2.3, 3.83, 2.62, 3.29. Okay, it looks like our answer is correct. And very important that you use these. Don't say something like this. Oh, I'll multiply this by 3, then this by 3, and so on. Because what if we decide to change the credits? What if course 1 now has 4 credits instead of 3, right? So you don't want to do this. Or if it has 2 credits, what if it increases, decreases? To make sure you don't specifically write the 3s, and of course, even worse, don't write the course grades like 76, 56, because the grades are different depending on the students. Okay, now we can actually go back to GPA distinction and check if it works. Remember this whole GPA distinction. So I'll autofill it all the way down. Let's see. Okay, this makes sense, no distinction. Remember, anything less than 3.2, no distinction. High distinction for this, it's more than 3.8, no distinction. Honors for this one, is it right? Yeah, okay, so the numbers or the values look to be fine. So our code is indeed correct. And notice how we only have one end if. Why? Because we originally started our if statement here, then we had a bunch of else ifs, and finally one end if to end the whole thing. However, if you didn't use else if, like if you decided to do here an if, and this then would have to be its own if, where you're checking if it's less than or equal to, or strictly less than 3.2. If you decided to go with this idea, which works, but notice when I run it, will it give me a problem? Yeah, it'll give us a problem, and it's saying block if without end if. If you do this, each if statement will need its own end if. And this would technically work. Oops, you need to be here. This would work, but again, it's doing unnecessary checking, right? Because say your GPA is 4, you only need to check here if you're more than 3.8. If you are, that's it. You don't need to keep checking. Right now, if you write it each its own individual if statement, it'll keep checking. Your GPA is more than 4, or it's 4, you'll check here. Are you more than 3.8? If it is, you'll do this. Then you'll check again. Are you more than 3.5? But you don't need to check for that because you already checked. Actually, would this give us a problem? This might actually give us a wrong answer. Yeah, I think this was something I wanted to mention, but I forgot. We might actually get a wrong answer if we decide to do this idea. Why? Let's see. Let's see what happens if I run this again. Yep. Do you see the difference now? We're either getting no distinction or honors. So it's actually wrong to do it this way. Why? If your GPA is 4, you're checking, are you more than 3.8? Yes, we temporarily write high distinction. Then we check, are we more than 3.5? Yes, 4 is more than 3.5, we write distinction. Is 4 more than 3.2? Yes, we write honors. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you're overriding your values if you do it like this. So actually we do want it to be, we might need to use the else if statements, unless we do it in reverse. I think if we write the logic in reverse, it might work. So if we do it something like this. So first I'll check for the no distinction, then I'll work my way upwards. This might work, but we're doing multiple checkings. So say now your GPA is 4. First you check, am I less than 3.2? No, so I don't do this part. I check, am I bigger than 3.2? Yes, so I temporarily write honors. Am I more than 3.5? Yes, so temporarily I write distinction. Am I more than 3.8? Yes, so temporarily I write high distinction. Does this one work? No distinction, high. Okay, so I think now our answers are correct. But again, what's the problem with this? Why do you check multiple times when you don't need to? Right? Ideally, you'd only want to unless you have to, you'd like to only check once. So as you can see, there's no unique solution with this stuff. There could be multiple ways of thinking, which is cool. But moving on, I think we spent a little bit more time than we need to on this part. Okay, so part 3 is just saying use the high distinction or GPA distinction that we used in part 1. or we created in part 1. Now it's time for exercise 2. Game seats. Assume there are 3 kinds of seatings at a football stadium. Seats near the front cost 25, those in the middle are 20, and then other seats are 15. Write a function game income that takes an argument, these seats that we talked about, and also the total number of seats available. So how many of each type of seat did you sell? So I sold maybe, well, actually notice, check this example. So front seats, they sold 2,500, middle seats, they sold this much, other seats this much. But in total, there's 20,000 seats. So at most, you're going to be selling 20,000 seats. So after you take these arguments, it's then going to calculate and return the percentage of seats sold and the income of the tickets. Okay, the answer returned is a string that looks like this. So these are the answer that we want. So you sold 70% of the seats and you made this much income. Okay, a lot of information, but baby steps. Let's just at least start writing the function. So it's game underscore income. We have 4 parameters. So say front seats as single, middle seats as single, and other seats as single. So they're all just numbers, and we have total as single as well. So the total seats. Now I know the total seats is 20,000, but it might change, right? So make sure you're reading it as an argument. And by the way, these are all arguments when we put them here. But anything that you write down here, like if I decide here to dim another variable, so we haven't done this before, but say I dim profit as single, say I do that. This is a local variable that I created, but these are all arguments. So these you read them or you pass them in Excel, just like we did with GPA distinction. I'm passing it J5, one argument. So important to know the difference there. But anyway, the reason I defined profit, and I'm also going to define something called percentage. I don't need to, but this is just to make things a bit more neat. So I have 2 variables, one I'm going to calculate the profit, and the other I'm going to calculate the percentage. Let's do the percentage first. So how can I calculate the percentage? Well, I have front seats, middle seats, and other seats. And I have the total. Really the percentage of anything. Like imagine it's like red balls, blue balls, green balls, and then you have the total amount of balls. To calculate how many of the percentage of seats you sold, you sum everything and you divide it by the total, then you multiply by 100. So percentage is what? Summing the seats. So front S plus middle S plus other S. Summing everything, and then I have to divide them by the total number of seats. However, if I write it like this, only other will be divided by total because division is stronger than summation. So I have to write brackets to give priority that first I'm going to be summing, then I'm going to be dividing. A reminder with the brackets, be very careful, like only put it when it's necessary. Then I multiply by 100. So I don't need to put brackets, for example, here. It might not hurt, but I don't really need to. Like first I'm dividing by the total, then I multiply by 100 to really get that percentage feel. Okay, now before I continue, I'd like to check if my answers so far are correct. So I'll just say game underscore income equals percentage. Like right now I'm only calculating the percentage. Let me check if my answer is correct. So open the ticket sheet over here equals game income. I'll give it, and it's very important, you have to give it in the order. So I created them as front, middle, other, and total. So first the front, middle, other, then the total. You don't give the total first, you have to give it in the same order that you did. And I'm getting 70.300, which is close to the 70.3% here. So my answer is indeed correct, which is great. So we might need to round it so we don't get all these numbers. Now, did they mention this anywhere? Not sure if they mentioned to round. If they didn't, we can like do it ourselves. They did say that the answer should look like this. So probably that means we need to round. Okay, now I do the other part. So I'll comment this out for a second. So when you put, I'm not sure, I didn't mention maybe this last time, but when you put like these two quotations, I think we need two single quotations. I'm not sure if one is enough. Okay, one quotation is enough. If you put a single quotation, this becomes a comment. You see how it's highlighted in green? Everything here gets ignored. It no longer executed. So like if I actually run this again, I'm no longer getting 70%. Why? I'm still calculating the profit or the percentage. I'm still calculating it, but I'm never assigning it. This is now being commented out. A comment, it's never gets executed. Usually you do a comment to explain something. Like I might write here a comment. I'm calculating the percentage by summing the seats sold and dividing by the total seats available, then I divide by 100. So this would be a comment. It's either explaining to yourself or somebody else who might be reading this code what you're doing. But moving on, now I'll calculate the profit. So how can I know what the profit is? Well, we have some variables we might need to create. So they did say seats are in the front are 25, middle are 20, and the other are 15. Now I could just write it right away. I could say front S. So this is the front S is how many solds you've sold at the front. We know it's 25, and the middle is 20, and finally the other is 15. I don't need to use the total seats, right? I don't need that variable here because these are just the total. These aren't the ones that you sold. Like you're not going to multiply it by a 0 or something like that. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, so we add these and let's just put it for now in game income and see what I have. So game income is profit. So 20 or 278,000, it's, yep, pretty close, 20, or that's it, 278,000. So that's our answer, it's correct. However, instead of maybe writing these numbers here floating, could be better to dim a constant. So I'm not sure if I remember how to do this, let me see. So dim constant, say front S cost, and I'll say 25. Let's see if it works. I need to say it's a single, so as single, would it work here? Expected identifier. Well, maybe no need for the dim. Actually, I don't remember the exact code for the syntax for constant. So maybe I just say constant front S25. I'll need to double check on that. How can we define it? But essentially a constant is unlike a variable. So when you say dim profit as single, it's a variable. Like profit could change. However, when I say constant front, it's constantly, the cost of the front seats are going to change. So let's see if my answer is still fine. Yeah, it's still correct. Again, constant is not going to change. Like I think at some point, if I decide to change it, say here, I decide to change it to 30, that might cause problems. Yeah, compile error, assignment to constant is not permitted. So with constants, once you define them, they're never going to change. And that's really what you'd want to do here. Like the cost of the seat isn't going to change in your code. Now you might say, hey, what if the prices do increase? Then you'll only change it here. Like if the cost now jumps from 25 to 30, you'll change it here. And then wherever you're using front S cost, front seats cost, like if I use it, say in here, I might use it in another variable, it gets updated like now it's 30. So why am I doing this? Why not just leave it front S times 25? And if I use it somewhere else, 25? Well, it's not really good to have just like a bunch of 25s floating in the air, especially if they're related. Okay, so that's why it's better to define it as a variable somewhere, or like a constant if it's not going to change, and then use it everywhere else. So I'm not going to do it, but ideally you'd do the same thing for the 20. You'd say something like, oh, middle seat cost, it's a constant, and other seat cost is a constant. Now, why won't I do this for the 100? Because for the 100, in this case, it is something that's kind of known. I don't need to make a variable for the 100 because usually when you're calculating the percentage, you're going to be multiplying by 100. It doesn't make a sense to make a constant variable, oh, 100. That's just going to be 100. In this case, it's fine. You can just multiply by 100. You don't need to do this. Okay, now we're kind of done with our, like, once we calculate the percentage and the profit, we're kind of done. I just now need to use them. Now, is this enough? If I say game income is percentage and then I say game income is profit, will this work? No, because like last time, the way we said it, and just like with exercise 1, if you do this, it doesn't work. Imagine it like this, temporarily. So I'm going to comment this out for a second. Temporarily, I'm putting in game income percentage. So like if I run this, I'm getting this percentage with a 70%. But when I reach this line and it executes, now you're overwriting game income with profit. So instead of 70%, you're getting now 270,000. So technically you are writing the 70%. It is happening, but it happens so fast, like you don't even see it and it gets overwritten by profit right away. So we don't want to do that here. We want to do a combination. Like I'd say something like, oh, percentage and profit. Remember the concatenation. Let's just see what happens if I simply concatenate percentage with profit. Let me add actually a space between them because this might be interpreted as a bitwise operation, something like that you don't need to know about right now. So I'm just going to put a dash between them before I concatenate. Okay, now it's working. So 70.3 and 278,000. Now I just need to make it look like how they want it. So sold, two dots. Okay. Now, but before I continue with this, you'll notice how it's much better to use these variables here. Like technically, I could have said game income is this whole thing here. Concatenated with a dash. And then concatenate it with this whole thing here. You could technically do that, but you'll notice how very long the statement has become. And I still need to add more stuff like the sold and all that. So it becomes really hard to maintain. Variables, their purpose is to make things easier. Like in this case, I have two things. Also, it helps with the problem solving, right? Because when you try to attack this as one big problem, oh, I have to get the income and I have to get the percentage, you don't know how to start. However, if you break it down, here I'm focusing on the percentage. Here I'm focusing on the profit. The process becomes easier. Now, so like you broke down the problem into 3 parts. First, you're getting the percentage. Then you're getting the profit, and now you're combining them together, which is its own challenge, right? Because you have to say here, oh, sold, dots, quotations, and then concatenate it. Very important, the dots, put them inside the quotations because it's part of your text. I don't know why some of you put it outside. A lot of you did that. So be careful. It's right here. So right now, all I'm saying is I added a sold at the beginning. So then I'd add maybe a space, and here we'd put a percentage after the percentage. So far, sold 70.3 percentage. Then I'd remove the dash because we don't want that. And after the profit, or is it after or before the profit, we want to put the $sign before. And we actually want to say income too. So I could say here income, $. And you'll notice every time I'm making a change, I'm going right away and checking what I did. Okay, so this looks good. In case you were getting them next to each other, like say I don't have here the spaces, I only have one space. Okay, now in my case, it's not happening, but in some of your cases, you might have been getting something like this, where they're not right next to each other instead of underneath each other. You could just add maybe a bit more spaces for that. Or like, yeah. Okay, but this is good enough for now. This is might be exactly what we want, right? Sold, income. Yeah, all looks good. Oh, we have a semicolon here. Again, the closer you are to what they're actually saying, the better, right? So we have the semicolon. Okay, now we'll look at the code in a second, but to make everything really done, ideally I want to have this for everything, and I'm not gonna write it the whole thing for everything. I'm gonna drag and drop. But the problem with drag and dropping is what, like, you might ideally want to fix the issues before you see them. Like, now you should be kind of comfortable with this stuff. Do you notice what's happening? Okay, so this 20,000 needs to be fixed. So it's the C1, we'll just fix it everywhere. Now we'll drag and drop. Okay, and you can compare the numbers. Hopefully everything is good. They look fine to me. Okay. So maybe we'll look one last time at our code. So we have 4 arguments. These are what we call arguments. You're reading them into your function. You're passing them when you use the function here. Then you might create some variables or some constants inside your function. So these, you never read them outside. You're not taking profit as an argument. You're simply using it somewhere to do some calculation, like we did here. So I calculate the percentage, calculate the profit, then I put the whole thing here. Imagine how hard and how frustrating it will be to have everything in one go. Like, I'd need this. Let me show you how it would have been if it was just one statement. So instead of percentage, I'd have this whole thing here. And instead of profit, I'd have this whole thing here. Right? Look how long it is, and there's so much room for error. Just try to make it simpler for yourself. And again, I'd like to remind you, make sure the concatenation, it's not like connected to anything. You'll see how when I try to connect it, it pushes it on its own. Do that yourself, because it might cause problems when you put certain conditions. So you see here how I removed the spaces and now it's causing problems. Make sure there's room between the concatenation and everything else. So it doesn't think that concatenation is like part of the word percentage. Like here it might think, oh, there's a variable called percentage concatenation, or this symbol. Okay. One more problem. I'll insert a model for it. What's the function called? So exercise 3, the last exercise. Wages macro. A charity firm pays its employees depending on the number of hours worked and whether they are volunteers. Okay, now actually, when I think about it, this is not going to be function. This is going to be a subroutine actually. For a non-volunteer employee, if the employee works more over 40 hours, the payment amount considers overtime. Okay, so a person is going to be working a certain number of hours. If they work more than 40, then anything that's more than 40, that's overtime. Now, the normal hours, they're going to get paid $8.5 for it, $8.5 for the regular hours. So if there are no overtime hours, so say you only work something like 35 hours, then simply we just multiply the 35 by 8.5 and you're done. However, if you do work more than overtime, say you worked something like 50 hours, how much should you get paid? The extra hours are paid at the rate of 1.5 times. So it's like the extra hours will be multiplied by 8.5 and then by a 1.5. That's the overtime. However, very important, it's the extra hours that get multiplied by this. Not everything. Like, you won't multiply 50 by all of this, because not all the 50 hours are overtime. Only the hours that are more than 40 are overtime. So in our scenario, if we subtract 50, or from 50 we subtract 40, we'll get 10, which is our overtime hours. This is what we multiply by the overtime, and then the rest of it was just like the base 40 that gets multiplied by 8.5. So only 10 hours are our overtime. So we have two scenarios, right? Or actually, we have 3 if we continue reading. Right. Okay, so we want to write a macro. That's how you know it's like a subroutine or like a macro that computates the proper payment for an employee. Now, you do have the scenario where you have volunteers. So if they're a volunteer, you're supposed to write a message saying thank you, and that's it. So volunteers won't get paid. Non-volunteers, so the actual employees, you do have to calculate their wage. So they actually give you three scenarios, because we do have 3 scenarios. What are the scenarios? You're either a volunteer, which is what I think happens in sample 1. You have to ask for the name. You're asked, are you an employee? You'll say, we click yes. Enter how many hours you worked. They say 12. Then they just say thank you for being a volunteer. However, you could be an employee, and that employee branches into 2 scenarios. You either didn't work overtime, which is sample out 2. So you get the name. They're probably going to say here, no, they're not a volunteer. They work 20 hours. They just get paid right away. Or the 3rd scenario, also an employee, but here they worked 45 hours. So there's like extra. So you could be an employee with overtime. So let me just write it one time. So here we have scenario 1. You're a volunteer. Or scenario 2, that you're an employee, but that scenario branches out to 2.1. You might have worked overtime, or 2.2, no overtime. So in general, you have 3 cases. Okay, so hopefully we understood the problem. Now let's actually try to solve it. You'll notice, like, when with these problems, unlike maybe before, where right away we read the question, or as we're solving with previous questions, like with the last lab or with the previous lab, like right away as we're solving, we're thinking. Here, it's not as straightforward. You can't just quickly read the problem and start working on it. You'd actually need to think beforehand, because the coding is just once you know the algorithm with coding with Visual Basic, you just have to write the statements. Okay, so I'd say there are 3 parts to this scenario. Like, first one, coming up with the solution or understanding the problem, then writing it into code, and of course when you write in the code, there's like the middle part of actually doing the logic, like how can I check if there are 3 cases and so on. So we'll do that part as we go, but very important to understand the problem properly before you start working. Okay, let's do this. So it's not a function, it's just a macro. So sub, they didn't really tell us what to name it, so I'll call it wages underscore charity. And you'll notice again with subroutines, again, not sure if we can't take a parameter. We probably can't, because we're not going to be using it anywhere. However, I could make my own variable. So what will I need in this case? I might need a variable that checks if I'm a volunteer or not. So I'll actually call that a boolean. So bool, or actually not. I'll just make it a single to be safe. So boolean is something that's either going to be 1 or 0, true or false. It's a type of variable. I'll just make it I'll make everything single so that there's no confusion, except we might need a string somewhere. So dem volunteer as single. Or now, if I need more variables, we'll go. So the first thing we really need to check is what? If a person is a volunteer. So volunteer equals what? Message box. So a message box is the thing that pops up. So if I say hello and I run this, so we're actually going to be running it here. We're not going to be using it back in Excel. If I run this, I get a message that only says hello. However, what we want to get is something like this. I want to get, first of all, I actually want to get the enter your full name. So I need that first. I need to dem name as not a single, as a string, because a string is for names, it's for a sequence of characters. So name equals not a message box. So 2 things we're learning here, an input box and a message box. An input box is because I'm taking something as input. Right? If I say a message box, you noticed before there's only like the OK. Now we're gonna fix it for the volunteer, but for now, if we're focusing on the name, I need some input. I need an actual name. So I'll say, enter your name. We run this. enter your name, hello, or random letters. The next message is going to be hello because I'm typing now a message box. And then I get a hello. Okay, makes sense. First, we're reading the name. Now we're going to check if they're a volunteer. So with message box, we could actually add, I don't know if it'll show up again. So message box, when I open it. The prompt, which is really like the message, and then you can add some more things to it. So I'll still say, are you a volunteer? Then I'm going to add things like VB yes, no. So VB yes, no. When I add this as a parameter, I get the extra option of, let me just show you, it'll be easier to see it. So enter your name, are you a volunteer? So we're getting a yes or no because that's literally one of the parameters that I added, VB yes, no. Before I didn't have this, I only got the option okay. So are you a volunteer? Yes, no. Depending if I say yes or no, it gets put here. Now we could actually also add VB question. Trying to remember what that does. Oops, extra bracket here. Enter your name. Are you a volunteer? Oh, we get this question mark. It wasn't here before. Like this is kind of a symbol that implies, oh, this box is a message box. Let me remove it and you'll see. So enter your name. And here there's no box, right? And I'm guessing here in the instructions. Now in the instructions, they don't really see it. They don't really put it. So it's fine if you didn't, but it's kind of nice to put it because they are asking for kind of a question here. So VB question. Okay. Now, do we need to ask any more information? We do. We want to know the number of hours worked, and finally, we'll output our answer. So dim as a single, say hours worked as single. Let's read that. It's also going to be an input box. So hours worked equals input box. How many hours did you work? Now, very important is there are 3 scenarios that they showed us. Does that mean I need to make 3 functions or 3 macros? Of course not. We're actually going to be making just 1 macro that will handle all these cases, which is literally what we're doing. So how many hours did you work? Let's run it one more time. Test. Are you a volunteer? Say yeah. How many hours did you work? Some number. Cool. Did you notice everything that I was doing? Like there's a lot of information that we need to read, but what did I do? I started with the first thing. I wrote what it gets for me. I started with the next, then with the next, and so on. So now I'm finished reading all my input. Then I'll start with the next step, which is actually making use of the input. Okay. Now you might of course need to know what input box is, what message box is, but that's like the whole purpose of your lecture is for you to learn this stuff and then in like the assignments to apply them. Again, one last time, message box is outputting a message, but it sometimes might be you could receive a yes or no answer from it. Input box is just literally getting some input. Now, first thing I need to check for is what if I'm a volunteer. So if volunteer is what? Not yes, not yes between text and not yes on its own as a variable. I need to check for something called VBS. Then I'll do something. So VBS is actually an input variable, so it's something that's already defined in Visual Basic. It's literally what you get. It's what you get when somebody presses yes. So when I'm typing in here a name, I'm getting a string. When I type in here a yes, I'm getting a VBS. It's something that's built in. And when I'm pressing a no, I'm going to be getting a VB no. Okay. So when I actually pressed cancel at the very end, now when I press cancel here, I get an error because I'm not handling what I should do when the user presses cancel. You don't have to worry about that. So if I'm a volunteer, then simply what? Remember, we just have to say thank you. So message box, thank you, and then the name, and you can add all like the other details. So thank you. To get the name, I'll just concatenate it with name, and like that's it. Let's do quickly this run. So test. Are you a volunteer? Yes. How many hours did you work? A lot. Thank you, test. Maybe we can add also the hours. So concatenate it with for working, and concatenating it with the number of hours. So hours worked, concatenated then with hours, and so on. You can got it. But what I just did here is not really simple, right? There's a lot of concatenations happening. First, the thank you message, concatenated. Then the variable name, concatenated. For working, and I put the spaces on purpose here so it doesn't get really stuck with the name. So this is working hours, concatenated with hours. A lot of you did mistakes where, oh, you forget a concatenation, or you say for working without the quotations, etc. Be careful with the syntax. Try to respect it as much as you can. Because if you don't, we're simply going to get an error. So like you have to abide with it. Okay, let me test this one more time so I make sure I don't have problems. Are you a volunteer? Yes. Thank you, trust, for working 44 hours. Great. You can make sure the whole message is as they want it. Okay, so this is handling the first case. If you're a volunteer, you do the following. Now I could write it outside. If a volunteer is VB no, then I do the work for VB no. However, I'm gonna do it in here. So I'm actually gonna say here else. So for multiple reasons, just like we were mentioning before, if you already knew that you're a VB yes, you don't need to check later if you're a VB no. You know that you're yes. So here, if I'm in the else, I know that what I'm a VB yes. Okay. Now we're gonna do something that we haven't seen before. It's gonna be a nested if statement. What does that mean? You could have if statements inside of other if statements. That's the whole reason I've been tabulating all this time, so you can see the difference. Like everything on this level is all under the macro wages charity, but everything here that's pushed is under this if. And everything that's going to be pushed here, like if I say hello here, everything here is under the else. Do you see what I'm saying? I'll repeat it one more time. Like these statements are on the same level of this if statement. However, this stuff that's inside, it's only for the if. So only if I am volunteer yes, I'll do this statement. If I'm not, so else, which would mean if I'm not VBS, I'm going to be VB no, else I'll do the statements here. However, the statement that I'm going to write here is also another if. What is this going to be? Well, I'm going to be checking if my wages is more than, if I worked overtime, essentially. So if hours worked, let's write some comments. That might be good. So here, first check if volunteer. In the else, we are not a volunteer, so an employee. So if I reach the else, that means not a volunteer, so employee. Now inside, I'm checking. So you see, notice now the importance of comments. Check if worked overtime. So if the hours worked are more than 40, strictly more than 40, because if it's exactly 40, you didn't work overtime. So no need for the or equal. So if I'm more than 40, how about we do the less than 40 first? That might be easier. If I'm less than or equal to 40. So check if didn't work overtime. So if hours worked is less than 40, then I'll say end if for now, but it'll be something else. So if I worked less than 40 hours, what should I do really? Well, let's check back to the solution. So we're doing this other sample. We're still getting the name, then they're going to say no. So you'll notice that there's a lot of things in common. Like this first part, the reason I put them on their own here, because you're always reading the name, checking if they're a volunteer or not, and then working the hours. This is always going to be the case. And then afterwards, you start checking if how many hours they worked, if they're an employee. So enter the hours worked, that's 20. Then you simply output, so the name and how much they. Okay. So if hours worked is less than 40, I could, now I'm going to do it first simply, but then we can do it more efficiently. But I'll just output a message box. No need, actually, let me write it on its own. It's not similar to the one before. So message box, I think at first the name, right? So name concatenated with your wage is, say, concatenated with. So what do you think we should put here? The name, their wage is what? Simply they worked less than 40 hours. Important, you don't say 40 times 9.5. They didn't work exactly 40 hours. They worked at most 40 hours. So they might have worked less. So I'll multiply the hours worked by 8.5. Now you'll notice something, right? This is what I kind of tried to mention before. Oh, you'll notice it in a second when we do the else. Okay. So message box name, your wage, let's try this one out. Enter your name. Are you a volunteer? No. How many hours did you work? I'll do the example in one that they said it's 20. Test, your wage is 170. Great. So 170 is the one that they wanted right here. Maybe we'll add a dollar sign just so it looks a bit better. So your wage is right here. Dollar sign is what we need. Cool. Let's read this one more time. If I'm a volunteer, I'm only doing this part. Else, if I'm not a volunteer, so if I'm an employee, I'm doing all of this. However, inside this else statement, there's another if statement. That's fine, because if you're an employee, you have two things you want to check. Do you work less than 40 hours or more? Now, again, I could write this outside for the more. I could write it on its own here, but using the same logic, I think you'd agree it's better to write an else here. So if I'm not an employee, I'm checking, if I am an employee, I'll check first. Did I work less than 40 hours? Great. If not, that means I worked more than 40 hours. So what should I do? I'm not going to multiply the hours worked by 8.5 right away. So going back to the example that we had here. Say you worked 50 hours. 10 of them are going to be overtime. How did I calculate that 10? Well, the hours that I worked minus the base, which is 40. Then the rest, which is what? The rest is 40, gets multiplied by 8.5. And the 10 gets multiplied by overtime, which is 8.5, and then 1.5. Same logic. So the 8.5 is actually going to be the 40. And the overtime will be something like, hours worked minus 40 times 8.5 times 1.5 and then plus here. Does this make sense? So the reason I put these between brackets, because I do the subtraction, then I multiply by 8.5, then I multiply by 1.5. So if hours worked was 50, you'd get 50. You get 50 minus 10 here, minus 40, which gets you 10 times the overtime. Then the base, which is 40 with 8.5. I'll do the example they had, which is, I think it's 45 hours. No, I'm not a volunteer. 45. Thank you. Your wage is 403.75, which is right here. 403.75. Cool. Basically, we're done. I'll explain one more time what we did, but I'd like to do a few more adjustments first. So you notice here the 8.5, it's being repeated 3 times. So that's not really good, because this is what I was trying to say before in exercise 2. what if the number of the amount you're getting paid for the hours changes? What if now it goes from 8.5 to 9? You're gonna have to go here and change each one to 9, and there might be one somewhere that you never see and you miss it. So your code isn't really optimized, say, or safe. There's room for error. However, if we make something like a constant, say our wage is 8.5, and I use that instead of the 8.5, now say the wage goes up from 8.5 to 9, instead of having to go to each where the number would have been and change it, I could just go over here at the very beginning where my constant is. I'll change it from 8.5 to 9. That's what I was trying to say with the front and middle seats from before, or from like for the cost of them, but we'll keep it as 8.5. And same thing for the wage, like that number 1.5, it's not really something. What if it changes? What if the overtime becomes 2 or 1 or 2 times, right? So it's better to put this in a constant. Also the 40s, what if the overtime changes? What if you work more than 50 hours? That's when you will be considered as working overtime. So also this would be better to put in a constant rather than having it floating in the air. But it's good enough for now for what we want here. So one last time, let's see what we did. Here we have our variables and our constants, but you noticed I didn't just write them in one go. As I was going, whatever I needed, I put it there. And it's very important like to put them in like one place so it doesn't get lost. Then I started reading my input. So like I could put here declaring variables and constants. So const is short for constant. And then here I could say reading reading my input. Like your variables, you're filling them, name, volunteers, hours worked. Okay, now we're checking, is the volunteer VB? Yes. So the variable where you put the message box, is that where you're asking if they're a volunteer. Is it VB? Yes. If yes, we message box. Else, if you're not a volunteer, you check, did you work less than 40 hours? If yes, you do this. Otherwise, you do this. Okay, now this is more than enough, but however, if we want to really optimize this, which we don't need to, this message box could have been just one message box. What am I saying? I could have made a variable dim wage as single, right? I could have made that. Since here you'll notice it's the same message in both of them. The only difference is the amount they're getting paid. So I could say here, wage is this amount paid in the scenario where I am not working overtime. And in the scenario where I am working overtime, it's going to be this. Why am I doing the following? You'll see in a second. So this is the wage if I, etc. Now, instead of having a message box here and a message box here, what I'm actually going to do is I'll put one message box at the end here, and I'll just output with it the wage. I'm going to comment out. I don't want to delete them, but I'm going to comment them out. This and this. And remember, commenting, it's as if they're gone, okay? So this now no longer exists. It's as if I removed it. You know what? I'm going to remove it for a second just so we don't get confused. So what did I do? Instead of putting this its own message and this its own message, like for when I work less than overtime or more than overtime, instead of doing that, I'm making one message box in general for both. And instead, in the if statement, I'll calculate the actual wage because, again, it's the same message box. The only difference is how much they get paid. So I made a variable called wage where I calculate that, and then I message box it outside. Why should I put it here and not inside? Because, remember, the else, all of this is when you're an employee. All of this is when you're an employee. Now, these two, their job is only calculating the wage, and when you're done, then you message box, how much they get paid. Do you see the difference? Before we had a message box and a message box. Now no, the purpose of this part is only to get the wage, and this purpose is to put the message box. Do you have to do this? No, anything that works should be fine, but this is just to show you how it could be. Let's go over those cases to make sure our code still works, and let's go over all the cases one more time. So test, are you a volunteer? No. I work this much. Okay, okay, that's correct. I thought I did press no, right? Let me repeat this. Did I press no? Because I wanted to do this test when I'm a volunteer. So I'll say yes, I am. This is how much I worked. Okay, great. Thank you for working. Enter your name. Are you a volunteer? No. So this time let's work less than 40. So 20. We get 170. That's good. I'm using the same examples that they used to make sure, of course, first that the answer is correct. But it's good to use more than, like, to do your own things. So 45, 43, okay. Like, for example, what if I only worked 1 hour? So you enter your name. Are you a volunteer? No, I only worked 1 hour. Okay, I get paid 1.5. That makes sense, right? Because each hour is only 8.5. So like that tests some stuff out like that out. Okay, so I'll get back what I commented. I'll keep it commented, but to show you the difference. Okay, I think that's everything that we need to do here. Now, of course, if you do get unfortunately, if the answers are correct, that doesn't mean that your solution is necessarily correct. Like, you might still be getting these cases correct, but there might be like a scenario where you don't take care of it. Like, maybe, now this is unlikely, but maybe the example that I just did with the one, maybe it doesn't work in your case. That's why it's important to test several cases. But if, like, the base cases that we give you, if you have them right, like, chances are your answer is probably correct. But okay, so I think this is it, and this is the last guideline solution. So hopefully these were beneficial for you, and I'll not see you in the next one because this is the last one. Goodbye.